Hello everybody, welcome to episode 2 of Flickcharting. I'm the beer and Flickchart guy, David, and I'm not drinking a beer today because, I've got a waistline to look out for. I can't be drinking beer every time I Flickchart, but I'll show you one I drank not too long ago and I kept the bottle. Pirate. Look at that bottle. Isn't that cool? I think by the time I got a hold of this bottle from Belgium, I think that it had maybe started to go a little bit skunky. I got it on discount, and so maybe that explains why. But so I don't know if I can give a really accurate account of its quality, but I thought the bottle was so cool that I kept it. I don't keep a lot of bottles. I'm not a hoarder, but ones that are significant, ones that are cool looking, those go as, kitchen accents until I have to move out of my apartment or whatever. Well, to get off started Flickcharting today, I thought I would add a movie. I'm going to add Gimme Shelter from 1970, the Rolling Stones concert movie by the Maysles brothers and Charlotte Zwerin. Famous because it depicts the disastrous Altamont concert in which the Hells Angels stabbed somebody to death after having beaten up many, many, many people over the head with clubs throughout the day of the concert. I guess what made me want to finally sit down and watch this movie, I'd seen clips of it. It's the kind of thing you see clips of here and there. What made me want to sit down and watch it was that I wrote about a music documentary for the Flickchart blog that's going to post later this week, and I wanted to compare it to this movie. And also the sad events in Waco earlier this week that reminded us that violent, sociopathic, idiotic biker gangs are still with us and are still perfectly willing to bring chaos to otherwise peaceful gatherings. Gimme Shelter is currently ranked. Let me see here. Oh, there we go. Got my clicker where it needs to be. Okay. Gimme Shelter is currently ranked 1264 on Flickchart and wins 56% of its matchups. It's very often considered one of the best music documentaries of all time. So let's see where it lands for me. We've got Gimme Shelter versus Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Okay, so both of these movies have really good songs of totally different sorts. I mean, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang has, sort of upbeat, kid-friendly musical numbers, and Gimme Shelter has some already kind of dark Rolling Stones songs that really take on an even darker tone due to the events that are being depicted on screen. I think I'm going to have to go with Gimme Shelter for this one. Even though Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is cool and has a bunch of characters from James Bond movies like Q and Goldfinger. Gimme Shelter versus The Hunt for Red October. I love submarine movies. I think I might have mentioned that in episode 1, but I don't really remember if I did or not. I'm going to go with Hunt for Red October over Gimme Shelter. I think it's the best Jack Ryan movie. Gimme Shelter versus Birth of a Nation. I believe that I was compelled to talk about Birth of a Nation in the first episode. I think this time I can really safely vote against it. Gimme Shelter is a really just compelling, disturbing experience. And Birth of a Nation is a disturbing experience that is compelling in a more intellectual way rather than an emotional way. So Gimme Shelter is going to take the win there. Versus The Sting. I'm going to go with The Sting there. I like the Newman-Redford duo, which was you could sort of call it the George Clooney, Matt Damon, or the George Clooney, Brad Pitt duo of the 1970s. I like The Sting better than Butch Cassidy. And both of them are kind of mid-chart movies for me. But I'll give it to The Sting. Versus Poltergeist. I really love supernatural horror. Supernatural horror just always seems to be about something real in a way that, like slasher horror, I don't think necessarily is. Maybe that's not fair of me to say to slasher horror, but I like the fact that Poltergeist is this very Spielbergy family movie about a family that's, being pulled apart, and are they going to, hold together, or are they going to get pulled apart? And it's also about television, it's about suburbia, it's about, runaway development. It's, got to be in some way about Reagan's America. It's got Craig T. Nelson reading that Reagan biography right smack there in 1982. I got to go with Poltergeist, having talked about it that much. Versus the Grapes of Wrath from 1940. Gimme Shelter or Grapes of Wrath? Grapes of Wrath is a good John Ford movie. Henry Fonda, obviously, it's an adaptation of the novel. I have never read the novel, so I can't compare the movie to the book, but I thought the movie was really good. And recently there was there's a TV network I get called Movies TV Network, and they were showing Grapes of Wrath, and they made this great trailer for it that makes it look... The trailer is in the style of like a modern movie, and it makes it look almost like a thriller, which it's definitely not a thriller, but I like it well enough to give it the vote over Gimme Shelter. Gimme Shelter versus The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. That, of course, that's a Richard Burton Cold War. That is a thriller. That one doesn't have to look like a thriller. It is a thriller, and sort of a courtroom drama, sort of a realistic spy, almost like a spy procedural, you could say. I guess that the story didn't do as much for me as the performances did, and for that reason I'm going to go to Gimme Shelter over Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Gimme Shelter versus Schindler's List. Schindler's List, not my favorite Holocaust movie. I've seen a good number of Holocaust movies. Schindler's List is not perhaps at the top. There's something, just as there are things I like that are Spielberg-y in Poltergeist, which Spielberg wrote and produced but theoretically didn't direct, although I defy you to watch that and tell me that he wasn't in charge of that camera. There are things Spielberg-y that I don't like as much about Schindler's List, that I think kind of take away from the fundamental power of the source material that he's working with. That said, I think I'm going to go with it over Gimme Shelter. I don't know why. Maybe I have a bias against music documentaries, even ones as really, really well put together and important as Gimme Shelter. How strange that I'm going for Schindler's List. Gimme Shelter versus Five Easy Pieces, a 1970 matchup. Two 1970 movies, in very, very 1970s movies in very different ways. Five Easy Pieces is Jack Nicholson as a concert pianist who doesn't want to be around his family, and he's got sort of psychological, he's got a sort of a loner complex. It's got that great scene where he's trying to order a sandwich. It's got Sally Struthers, Karen Black. In this particular case, I think I'm going to go with Gimme Shelter, because if Five Easy Pieces is telling us something about the way that the counterculture was losing its focus in the 1970s and getting darker, getting grimmer, people not knowing what to do with themselves now in this sort of brave new world. It's sort of indirectly about that. Gimme Shelter is directly about that, and it gives you a lot to latch onto and a lot to admire in the filmmaking. I'm going to go with Gimme Shelter over Five Easy Pieces. So it lands at 296 on my Flickchart out of 814. I guess I gave it a pretty good account. I guess I'm not going to drag down its total too much, drag down the weight. It probably won about 56% of those matchups. Well, let's go to the all movies filter. Do a little all movies filtering. I almost wish I had a real beer instead of just an empty bottle. All this talking makes my mouth dry. Have not seen Henry V from 2012. I haven't Flickcharted in the last few days, so I think there's probably some new titles on here that we're going to see before I get to stuff I've seen. It's Me, Hillary. I've got no idea. Okay, now we've got one I've seen. That's Only Yesterday by Isao Takahata. It is a pretty early Ghibli movie. Not Miyazaki. Miyazaki neither wrote nor directed it, and it's up against The Manchurian Candidate. I talked last time about how I love The Manchurian Candidate, but I love Ghibli even more, and Only Yesterday wins. It Happened One Night versus Aladdin. I have not seen Aladdin in so long, and it's not on Netflix. I mean, even the disc isn't on Netflix. I know I'm one of the few people who still receives Netflix discs, but there's so much that isn't on streaming that I feel like I have to have discs, and unless I want to subscribe to a million other streaming services. But Aladdin isn't even on disc, so fortunately I have a copy on my computer, and I'm going to go with it over It Happened One Night. Did I mention that it was up against It Happened One Night? Some people told me that I should say both things because they're not watching me, they're only listening to me. So I'm going to try to do that. The Goonies versus Star Trek The Next Generation, The Best of Both Worlds. Well, so The Best of Both Worlds was that famous two-part TNG cliffhanger where it ends with Riker. Picard has been captured by the Borg and turned into Locutus of Borg, and it ends on the cliffhanger where Picard is on the Borg cube, and Riker says, "Mr. Worf, fire." It's got a zoom in too. "Mr. Worf, fire." And then it wound up in theaters like 4 years ago as part of its anniversary, I guess. I'm not. It's up against The Goonies, which is a shrill Spielberg movie that I don't care for. It comes out right around that same time as Temple of Doom, where all Spielberg seemed to want to do was film people screaming in the highest possible register throughout a sort of Nickelodeon Legends of the Hidden Temple type set, that just is kind of technically cool. The sets are kind of cool, but they also just kind of look like clunky 1980s sort of almost, television game show quality sets. I'm going to go with Star Trek over The Goonies, even though Star Trek episode is not a real movie. It jumped 5 points on my chart. I gotta write that down. 5-point jump. That's not bad. I like to see it. I like to see low jumps. To Be King from 2012. I have not seen it. Shawshank Redemption versus Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Shawshank Redemption, I think, is a vastly overrated movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just don't think it's a really special movie. I think it's a pretty standard arc. I think it's got a sort of unrealistic ending. The Morgan Freeman character is a trope that I find awkward. And I think it would have been a much better movie had it been about a guilty person in jail rather than a supposedly wrongfully convicted person in jail. Just, would have given it a more sense of reality to me. I'm going to go with Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. I think that scene where Jack Sparrow walks off the sinking ship onto the dock, just as the crow's nest is sinking beneath the waves, Jack steps off, totters off. That really works for me. I like it a lot. Going with Pirates of the Caribbean. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers versus Unbreakable, an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Well, let's just go with Two Towers on that and not even bother to delve into the many reasons why. National Velvet versus Village of the Giants. Now, Village of the Giants is an MST3K movie. Those seem to come up a lot when I'm doing beer and Flickcharting. Village of the Giants has Beau Bridges and a young Ron Howard. And it's it's an exploitation movie. And it's wretched. But the fact that it has those big names in it really gives the MST3K guys something to chew into. I don't vote on the riffing, I vote on the movie. So it's always going to lose to a real movie. And National Velvet is a real movie. The Cider House Rules versus Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. That is the live-action 1994 Jungle Book, not the Disney cartoon from the 60s. Both Jungle Books are great, but Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, the live-action one from 1994, with Cary Elwes and John Cleese and other fascinating people whose names are escaping me right now. That movie, I think when I was young, I was 10 years old in 1994, and I made my mom take me to see that movie about 7 times in theaters. I loved it. I love it to this day. I went years without seeing it because I don't know that it ever got a DVD release. Finally, I got a copy for my computer in much the same way that I got my Aladdin copy. Wink, wink. I saw it for the first time in years and years and years, and I think it holds up great. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor. It's a treat. And it wins over Cider House Rules, which did I have last time? I think the only thing great about Cider House Rules is the Michael Caine line that he says over and over again. Good night, you princes of Maine, you kings of New England, whatever it is. All right, we've got Runaway Jury versus The Seduction of Joe Tynan. Now, you would think The Seduction of Joe Tynan would be a good movie when you look at the cast. It stars Meryl Streep and Alan Alda. It's really not that good of a movie. I spent a long time trying to track it down, and when I finally did, I was so excited. I got a VHS copy of it. I found a working VHS player, sat down with a beer, of course, to enjoy my Seduction of Joe Tynan, and I was really disappointed by it. Why? I don't know. Over the top. It was just over the top. Which Alan Alda, he's frequently over the top, but a lot of times in movies he plays, he plays kind of bad guys where he kind of keeps it reined in to be a little menacing. And he's not a great guy in The Seduction of Joe Tynan either, but he's kind of the manic Alan Alda guy, which I think works well on the TV show MASH. I don't know if it always works well in movies. I'm going to vote for Runaway Jury, which is fine for its Gene Hackman performances and whatnot. Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, a classic MST3K episode, a very beloved, terrible movie, versus Olympia Part 1 Festival of Nations. I quickly flicked past an Olympia Part 1, or Olympia Part 2, I think, Festival of Beauty, in Beer and Flickcharting Episode 1. But in this case, let me talk about it for a minute. Leni Riefenstahl, you guys know who Leni Riefenstahl is, I assume. If you're watching this, you probably know. She was the documentary filmmaker for the Third Reich. So, unfortunately, her documentaries are tainted by her association with the Nazi regime. But they are really quite good and quite revealing of many, many different things. And her technique as a documentarian is really no better displayed than it is in these Olympia movies, which are about the 1936 Summer Olympics that were held in Berlin. It's a 2-part documentary, well worth seeing, and it beats some crappy garbage from MST3K. Okay, good crappy garbage from MST3K. I have not seen gerontophilia. I think I know what that means, and that's a little weird. The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou versus Saturday Night Fever. Life Aquatic, one of my favorite Wes Andersons. It's going to beat Saturday Night Fever, which I think it's got the famous dance, the famous John Travolta dance, and it's got the Bee Gees soundtrack, and it doesn't have much else going for it. But did you know that was Saturday Night Fever was Gene Siskel's favorite movie? Roger Ebert wrote about that once, and you can in his review, and you can tell that Roger Ebert finds this somewhat incredible that this would be Siskel's favorite movie, but he really works hard to understand why it's Siskel's favorite movie. But for me, Life Aquatic wins. Deathly Hallows Part 1 versus Life of Brian. I think Deathly Hallows Part 1 might be the best Harry Potter movie. I'm not saying it's my favorite, but I think the scene in the tent with Harry and Hermione dancing to the radio, I think there was nothing better than that in any of the movies, from just a pure, expressive, evocative, artful moment. And Unfortunately, it's not enough to beat what it's up against, which is Life of Brian. Life of Brian, not my favorite Python movie, but it's got easily enough quotable moments and iconic scenes to beat a Harry Potter movie. No offense to Harry Potter. We got another Ghibli. We got Whisper of the Heart versus Paths of Glory. Whisper of the Heart is my top-ranked Ghibli movie at number 14. Miyazaki didn't direct it, but he did write it. It's also one of the least seen Ghibli movies on Flickchart. So if you want to help bump up its score, it needs your help. Whisper of the Heart wants you to watch it. It's a great movie, and it beats Paths of Glory, which is a very solid Stanley Kubrick, Kirk Douglas movie, better than the other Stanley Kubrick, Kirk Douglas movie, Spartacus, by my standards. But it loses to Ghibli, as so many things will on beer and flick charting. The Man Who Would Be King versus An Autumn Afternoon. I wrote about The Man Who Would Be King for the Flickchart blog recently in our Best of 1975 post. Oh, this is going to shatter my chart if I do this. If I vote for An Autumn Afternoon over The Man Who Would Be King, am I going to do that? I'm really thinking about it. They're both top 50 movies for me. An Autumn Afternoon is Yasujiro Ozu. We had it in... I think I remember... I'm getting deja vu. I think I remember I already talked about it. But it's a great movie, especially if you want to see a very slow movie about the Japanese economic boom and the fragmentation of Japanese society along generational lines and class lines as that boom begin to be felt in the realm of the consumer economy. So in other words, it's a niche movie. But I'm gonna go with The Man Who Would Be King and spare my chart a massive upset. All right, I'll hold steady at 21. The Apartment versus the Royal Tenenbaums. So I already mentioned that I think I like The Life Aquatic better than the Royal Tenenbaums. But I certainly like The Apartment, Shirley MacLaine, Jack Lemmon, Billy Wilder movie, better than any Wes Anderson movie. And that's not to say Wes Anderson is bad. It's just that Billy Wilder is better. The Arrival of a Train at La Ciotat. Hey, and that's what we do, by the way, on Flickchart. If they're all 5-star movies, which one is best? Well, that was probably a case. I mean, all the Billy Wilder movies and all the Wes Anderson movies, give or take a few, are probably all 5-star movies. Okay, Arrival Train at La Ciotat, that's the famous one where there's a myth that the audience thought it was a real train coming at them because it was 1896 and they didn't know what a movie was. Really, there's no basis for that, in fact. And even if there was, it wouldn't be The Sound of Music, which I already talked about last time. The Hunt for Red October, our old friend, getting to know that movie pretty well, versus Aliens. Aliens, to me, I mean, it's a very solid sequel. I like it a lot, but it is just kind of a popcorn movie, and that puts it on by my count just a half a step below kind of a really solid, serious Cold War espionage type thing. I'm going with The Hunt for Red October. You can't say no to Sean Connery. Russian accent or no. Okay, we've got Places in the Heart versus Goodbye Lenin. Goodbye Lenin was a sort of an independent German movie that has a really... I think it's got a great premise. The premise is that this boy's mother sort of falls into a coma or something right before the Berlin Wall comes down. And then she wakes up after the wall has come down. But the doctor tells her not to have any stress on her heart. So the son tries to prevent her from knowing that the Cold War has essentially come to an end and Germany has changed. And he keeps up this facade that they're still living in like communist East Germany instead of a united Germany. He keeps this facade up for as long as possible. I think that's a great premise, and it beats Places in the Heart, which I talked about in episode 1 being a nice movie, a nice enough movie that really just doesn't, it's just not all that powerful. Having some lag here on my webcam. Okay, The Lodger versus The Story of the Weeping Camel. That's new. Haven't seen those yet. I mean, they're on my chart. We just haven't seen them on Beer and Flickcharting. The Lodger is a silent Alfred Hitchcock movie in which he borrows very heavily from German expressionism to tell the story of like a London serial killer. I don't want to give anything else away about that because, you know, with Hitchcock, there's always twists. The Story of the Weeping Camel is a documentary. It's a set in Mongolia, and it's about the way that Mongolian camel raisers get camels to feed their young. If for some reason a mother camel is not feeding the baby camel, or the baby camel is not drinking the mother camel's milk or whatever, the Mongolian farmers need like a way to get that to happen. And one of the traditional folk methods for making that happen is to get somebody to come and play an instrument for the camels. And to see this little arc play out is really very moving, and I think more people need to see the documentary, and I think I'm going to let it beat Hitchcock's silent movie, which is kind of derivative of another genre. It's before Hitchcock, he's starting to find his feet, but he hasn't really fully done it, and I'm going with Story of the Weeping Camel. And it holds steady at $3.99. Speaking of holding steady at $3.99, I don't know if I think I might have the right side of my screen cut off. Huh. Well, that's something I'm going to need to fix for Beer and Flickcharting episode 3, because we're already deep into this one and it's too late for me to figure out what's going on. So let's make this the last matchup, shall we? Charlie Brown Christmas versus Quiz Show. I remember we had Charlie Brown Christmas the first time. Okay, Quiz Show. I was recently reading about the real story behind Quiz Show, and I wish I had done that before I saw the documentary, before I saw the movie. I mean, I knew that it was based on a true story, but I think really getting a sense of Charles Van Doren's personality and his opponent's personality from reading about it in David Halberstam's book, The 50s, would have really made it a more memorable experience for me. Otherwise, you know, I thought John Turturro was good. I thought Ralph Fiennes was good. But I'm going with Charlie Brown Christmas. I think I voted against it in episode 1, so now I'm going to even it out with a vote for it in episode 2. And that'll do it for this time. Next time, maybe I'll have a real beer, and maybe I'll figure out what is going on the right side of this screen. Unless I'm just talking crazy and you guys can see the right side of the screen. All right, in any case, I've been David. This is the Beer and Flick Charting, and I'll see you next time.